Jana with Purl Together. In the following technique video, I want to show you a way to cast on for a gauge swatch that will be very representative of what your stitches in your garment will actually look like. I'm hoping many of you might be compelled to abandon the traditional long tail cast on garter stitch edges for your gauge swatch. You'll see why. I'm going to begin my swatch gauge with some DK weight yarn. This is Prairie Spun from Brand Sheep Company in Mitchell, Nebraska. And the way I'm going to do this is use the needle that the pattern calls for just to see if I'm going to get gauge. Put my needle on so the tail is in the front. Initially, the working yarn is in the back. But then I'm going to lay the tail over. Okay, I'm going to have the tail pointing toward the back. And then I'm going to go in underneath and I'm going to grab the yarn just like I would if I was beginning a long tail cast on. Now, I don't normally do my long tail cast on this way, but a lot of you do, so that should be familiar. Tip your needle toward your thumb, then go down and around underneath, back up through the center, and then go all the way around the world underneath, and then continue through and do a little yarn over. Okay, don't worry, I'll show you that several more times. Toward your thumb, underneath, through the middle, all the way around the world, yarn over. Toward your thumb, underneath, through the middle, all the way around the world, yarn over. Toward your thumb, through the middle, all the way around, yarn over. Okay, now when we stop, we're going to not do the yarn over on the very last one, but I'm going to do a few more of these. And I'm also going to want to be mindful of spacing my stitches as I go with this. So don't want my cast on to be too tight. I want to make sure I'm spacing things out. So toward my thumb, underneath, through the middle, all the way around, yarn over. Toward your thumb, through the middle, all the way around, yarn over. Toward your thumb, underneath, all the way around. Now if I'm going to stop there, I won't do the yarn over on the last one. And I'm just going to get a hold of this. I'll pinch this here and I'll count and see how many stitches I have and how many I would want to need. Now if I'm doing a swatch like I'm about to start for a sweater, the gauge I'm after is going to be 4.5 stitches per inch. I want to do a good 6 to 8 inch swatch, right? So I'm going to figure 9 stitches for 2 inches. So I'm going to cast on probably 30 or 40 because I want a good representation, especially if I'm going to take the time to knit an entire sweater. For this purpose of showing you how this swatch cast on is going to look though, I'm just going to do an even number. And every time we do that motion I showed you, that casts on 2. So you should get an even number easily enough. When you're finished and you've cast on as many as you need, you're going to end up like this. And yeah, I haven't done that last yarn over because I don't need to at the very end. So I'm just going to pinch this and I'm going to hang on to that for a second and I'm going to turn my needle to the right as if, because I'm going to begin to knit. So hang on to that and you'll notice now that your tail, let me sort this, my tail's a little longer than I really needed it to be, but the tail is actually behind the working yarn. So that's good. So what I want to do is take this tail here and I'm going to just kind of hold it here and I want to kind of hold it against this needle and secure it until I begin knitting. Since it's behind, when I begin knitting and I take my working yarn up and over to do my first wrap on my knit stitch, that will pin that down and secure that tail. So we're just going to hang on to it for a second until we get started. So I'm just going to knit 1 row straight across. And you can see why it's important to space your stitches as you're doing the cast on with your right finger, right index finger, so that things are not too loose here. And you'll notice this is starting to kind of look like a provisional cast on. When I get through with a row or 2, I'm going to knit through this first row and purl back, and then I'll show you what I mean by that. All right, I've knitted 4 rows, and what I want to show you here is this cast on edge creates a very realistic replication of what's actually going to happen in your knitting. So if you notice, it looks like I've just got these live stitches that has one horizontal strand running through those loops. And it looks almost as if a provisional cast on, like I could just take this horizontal strand at the bottom and just go whoop and pull it right out and have live stitches. That's not the case, however, because that's, part of my working yarn, but that's the result that that swatch cast on creates. And so this loop, I mean, these stitches are loose just as they would be in your knitted garment. And that's the advantage here, is that you don't have anything pulling or too rigid as you might if you had a long tail cast on or a knitted cast on that was, tighter than you'd like it to be. This is much more realistic of what's going to happen with your yarn in a garment. So let me do the whole swatch and then I'll show you how I would end it. Cast off, do this particular cast off as well. All right, I finished knitting my small sample here. This is probably, I don't know, 3 inches square maybe. And if this were an actual swatch for a garment, I would do more than that. I'd probably do a 6 to 8 inch swatch so that I have a variety of places to measure. And that's not the only reason. Too often I see people with their little knit check square things with a little L-shaped window and it only measures 2 inches across, when really what you want to do is get a ruler and you want to measure as many stitches as you need to in order to land on a whole stitch at the whole inch. Let me show you what I mean by that. So what I mean when I say that is I'm going to measure enough stitches so that I get an accurate representation. So if I put this one right on the edge here, I mean, I don't tend to like to start on the very edge of the ruler. I start usually here. Okay, so there's the column of V's, and I put the V right there on the little big line. That's a half stitch, and you can tell because you go up and follow this column, that's a half a stitch on the 3 inch mark. So I need to measure a bigger swath or a larger measurement so that I'm ending and beginning, or rather beginning and ending on whole stitches. Okay, so right there's the edge of that, and I want to measure as far as I need to where I'm not measuring a partial. And I want to do that after I block it. So this isn't going to be terribly representative, but I wanted you to see what you're after. Once this is blocked, it might very well end up where the 3 inch mark is at the end on the right hand side perfectly to that stitch. So I'm just saying that's one reason you want to knit a larger swatch, is so that you can measure whole stitches instead of trying to say, well, this is 8.5 stitches over the course of 2 inches. You need a bigger area to measure whole stitches with whole inches. Hopefully that makes sense. So what we want to do here to end this is I just cut the yarn, threaded it on a darning needle or tapestry needle, and similarly to how we began, ending is much easier. It's much more simple. I'm just going to run this strand all the way through. Okay, that's all I'm going to do here. So that way I have loops, live loops on a horizontal strand of yarn, which is exactly what we did when we began. Now, if you do a bind off, a sewn bind off, the standard rigid bind off, if you do any of that, you're going to be distorting these stitches. And that defeats the purpose of an accurate measurement. So all I'm going to do now, I don't even feel the need to tie this off. You can if you want to. If you want to, weave that in, that's fine. But that's a long enough tail, it's not going to go anywhere. I'm going to give this a little bit of a soak, and then I'll pin it out and let it dry, and then I'll have an accurate representation of what this yarn and needle combination looks like in stockinette. All right, I hope that you found that helpful and you'll start casting on that way for your gauge swatches, and that you'll be compelled to knit a big enough swatch to actually be representative of the garment that you're about to create. If you find these videos helpful, hit the thumbs up button and become a subscriber. Thanks for watching.